Let's close our eyes for a moment. Okay, slowly come back. Lesson 7, contentment. The second Niyama. You read in the first paragraph that practice of contentment is only possible based on the practice of purity. Why would that be? Why would that be? Last week I already mentioned that with the practice of Saucha, purity, all the yamas come into play. To practice contentment,
I was going to go on a limb here, like maybe purity is the absence of desire, and only when you don't have any desire can you be content.
Well, contentment is often confused for laziness. And you can see, especially Buddhist countries, which are of course very good at practicing contentment because it's one of the great virtues of Buddhism. They do not really develop, do they? Because they're not so diligent, under the guise of contentment. It's a general tendency because it's only human. But contentment does not, it shouldn't be, of course, an excuse for laziness, but it is also, contentment is not, it's not promoting a lifestyle of laid-backness. Laid-backness will come naturally, but not based on laziness. I'm a little bit confusing maybe now. Contentment actually is equal to positive thought. Now, why do I make a point of this laziness? My grandfather practiced contentment in his own way, and the whole family suffered because of that. My mom was born before Second World War, and the whole world was already in a crisis by then, between the First and the Second World War. Second World War caused a lot of poverty in Europe, in the Netherlands. And my mom, being from a low-class family, of course, suffered a lot from the crisis that was going on at that time. Wealthier people, of course, struggled much less. So my mom told stories about the food stamps that they received. And based on the food stamps, they would, for example, receive a liter of milk, which they would then dilute with a liter of water. So they would have 2 liters of milk. And when they received eggs, they would boil the eggs and cut them in 4 parts, and everybody would get a quarter of an egg. Except my grandfather, who would get a whole egg. But my grandfather, he was always just smiling. I remember visiting every Sunday when I was a child. Every Sunday we would go there visit. And he would sit very contentedly in his chair and just watching all the children crawl over the floor. He didn't speak, just these eyes, always smiling. At some point, a Geneva would come out of the cupboard, and he would have a small glass of Geneva with a... Geneva is a poor man's whiskey. It's cheap, so it doesn't really taste that good. So he would always put a sugar cube in his Geneva and smoke a big fat cigar just on Sunday. So the whole room filled with blue cigar smoke, and there he sat, blowing smoke and drinking his Geneva. But he was too lazy to work. He repaired shoes, and he did that at home. And because of that, the neighbors complained about noise, and so they had to move frequently to another house, and the same pattern would repeat again. My grandfather is known for having participated in constructing what is called the Amsterdam Forest, which is a huge park, man-made park, on the outskirts of the southern side of Amsterdam. It's huge. Which was in fact a project to keep unemployed people busy and provide them with a small income. So that is a misguided form of contentment. That is why purity stands at the basis here. Contentment does not mean making the whole family suffer, even being hungry, because you're not taking good care of them. You're not taking your responsibilities, performing your duties, caring for your family. Contentment really is about doing with what you have and making the best of it. If my grandfather had done a little more effort, the whole family, my grandmother and my aunts and uncles and my mom wouldn't have had to suffer for so many years, for so severely. Contentment, somebody already said about the noise here, means do not let that noise get to you. It's just something that you cannot avoid. You can't go out to the ground floor because they're on the ground floor working on the parking elevator. You can't go out and pick a fight with them, but that so messes up your peace of mind, your sattva. Practicing contentment means dealing with those things internally for your peace of mind. Contentment means thinking the glass is half full rather than half empty. But you have to have a motivation to do that. And for that, we're only in the beginning of this course, but I've touched upon it several times already. We have to change the way that we think about the things that happen in our lives. We have a tendency to label things good or bad, positive or negative. In yoga we say there is no good and bad. Everything is just as it is. And if you change the way that you label things and start looking at the essence of things, you will see that indeed every negative aspect, every negative experience always leads to a positive outcome, with no exception. Then once you know that, you have to just consciously remind yourself of that. Whenever you end up in a situation that the ground is disappearing from under your feet, that you feel disaster is striking you, you must remind yourself of the fact that there is a purpose. There is a reason why this is happening. And instead of being miserable, which of course is the first reaction, it is only human, but instead of allowing the misery to drown you, you quickly go into an investigative mode. You try to rationalize what is happening, try to figure out why it is happening, what caused it, and what is my role in all this. Is there anything I possibly could have done differently? What is there for me to learn from this? So contentment means accepting that things are the way they are. And based on that, you proceed with your day, you proceed with your life. You can change things, but you cannot change the way things are. Going forward, you can indeed change things, but the way things are right now, that is just a fact. Instead of resisting that which is useless and simply disturbs your peace of mind, your sattva, which for us is our most important asset, you try to look forward. You try to see, first of all, the meaning in all of that, the purpose in all of that, and then what the alternatives could possibly be. What you could do to make it better, to change it, to turn it into something in accordance with your wishes, with your vision. Purity means that, in the case of my grandfather, he was violating most of the yamas, in fact, just to be comfortable himself. Very selfish, in fact. It's just his nature. I see a little bit of his character in my oldest brother also, although he diligently has worked all his life, but he has the same kind of. He does his work, and for the rest, just don't nag, don't bother him, just leave him alone. He just wants to watch his soccer games on Sunday and play his billiard 2-3 times a week. But at least he provided for his family. He has been working his whole life after graduating school. It's a little bit different, but I can feel the same kind of nature. This need to be comfortable, but then not being lazy. Questions about contentment? Yes, Ali?
Sometimes, working too much, like working too hard,
Yeah.
I think it's not the right way because, for example, like if we just like run so fast, we are just making our shoes to be like useless for all the past, right? That we do not for our life. For example, in some cases, like you can earn like much money, but some part of that money will disappear. Because, for example, this is like my experience.
Yeah.
I think that like I have some certain amount that I'm receiving from the like universe. So if I go like beyond that one, I can get like more.
Yep.
But if I go that like beyond that certain like threshold,
Yep.
then that amount of money someday will disappear. So again, I will go back to that line.
Yeah. So, in that sense, we need to find a balance in our lives. But where it comes to having an ambition, you have to also look at your karma. Ambition is driven by your past. People who were born poor, they want to be rich. People who were treated bad, bullied when they were when they were young, they have an ambition to become big and powerful. So, if you have an ambition, that is something that you need to work out. But if you do that in a yoga way, you do get busy. You do fight for what you need to achieve. Otherwise, you frustrate your process. But as a yogi, you do that consciously. And when it becomes harmful, you try to steer it in a direction where it is moderate, where it is reasonable. So you will see that your drive, your ambition can damage you. It can lead to you becoming sick. Look at the world that we live in. The number one cause of death is heart disease. Now, heart disease is caused by ambition, is caused by pushing ourselves, demanding more from ourselves than is reasonably possible. So, as a yogi, you cannot ignore or neglect your karma. Or what you can do is go through the process consciously so that you grow, so that you develop, and so that you also know when to put the brakes on when you're pushing yourself beyond your limits. Contentment cannot make your karma go away, but you can reduce the intensity of it. But you have to work it out. It's interesting that you touch upon that, because that is a big part of my story. I left home, family, and work behind, and I moved to the other side of the world because there was a fire in me, an ambition. And the first object of that ambition was the practice of Hapkido, which I wanted to continue. And the teacher that we had in Amsterdam left, went back to Seoul. And so that was my next destination. I just had to work that out. And I have harmed myself in the process. But not to the point that it's irreparable. Always had a chance to recuperate, but more importantly, to grow, to develop. And that is the whole point in all of this. And that is what happens when you start practicing yoga. Yoga makes you naturally introspective. You become more sensitive, more conscious, and that applies in the first instance to yourself. The first thing you start investigating based on your increased consciousness is yourself. Only once you have a handle on that, on yourself, then you start exploring the rest of the world and the universe. That is where science starts. It is for this reason that the yamas and the niyamas are so important. When you practice yoga, when you practice real yoga, that leads to that transformation, increased sensitivity and consciousness. Because without the yamas and the niyamas as a moral foundation, you would indeed end up harming yourself. Contentment relates a little bit to non-desire. Contentment, if you find it a difficult subject to apply directly into your life situation with family and work, start with your yoga practice. You know, when you buy a yoga book and you see all those photos of the very experienced yogi, very often they are ex-ballet dancers or gymnasts, professional sports people that turn to yoga. And you see those photos and you try to emulate. It's very easy to get frustrated for not being able to do those fantastic poses. Well, you're violating all the yamas there, of course. Violence, lying, stealing, and of course, non-desire. It's good to have a desire, but it has to be reasonable. I am not an ex-gymnast or ballet dancer, so I should not even try to pursue to emulate that photo in that book. Practice contentment in the way that you can do the poses, as opposed to being unsatisfied, dissatisfied with what you cannot do. Yoga, asana practice, meditation is very powerful indeed. And it really doesn't have to be perfect to be powerful. Every attempt that you make has a result, has an effect. So if you can change your mind about that, you will not only not be frustrated anymore, but you will actually start really enjoying what you do. Because it doesn't matter what it looks like. When I had a yoga studio, my own yoga studio, from 2002 until 2007, I had a yoga studio in Itaewon, very big, almost twice as big as this one. There were no mirrors. Every yoga studio has a mirror, it's standard architecture for a modern yoga studio. My studio had no mirrors. And when they recruited me to run the yoga program in World Gym, the first thing I demanded from them is to put curtains in front of the mirrors. They thought it was a very strange request, but I insisted. Why? To help you practice contentment. To help you avoid the trap of looking at yourself in the mirror and being dissatisfied with what you see. The mirror draws your attention out, external. That is in total contradiction with the goal of yoga that pursues to bring your attention internal. So you eliminate the mirrors, and people without knowing it naturally turn their attention more inward. Another thing that is very important to do is practice on your own, alone. Because then you can do just crazy and foolish things without any holding back, without shame, without just experiment and play. And that's actually more important than practicing in a group. Because even when you cover the mirrors, you're still aware of the people around you. Practicing on your own has a totally different dynamic. I'm not saying that you must practice at home. This is, after all, adult education. But try it out and you will see. Not only that, you will become addicted to it. You will fall in love with it. Then you start really experiencing how incredibly great it feels to practice yoga. When I started practicing yoga every evening before sleep, it was me and my book, my Holy Bible. I still have that book 40 years later, almost 40 years later. And it totally changed my life, just because I fell in love with it. All the benefits that I'm sharing with you of yoga, also, they're not fairy tales, although they sometimes may seem unrealistic. They're not. Provided that you practice yoga correctly in the ancient tradition, not the modern version, which is more like a sport, which is not bad. Sport, exercise is always good for anybody, but yoga is different if you do it correctly. It's in fact the opposite of sports. Then you really start to experience the deep impact that yoga has, that goes far beyond just exercise. You see at the top of the page an image of the Buddha, smiling, big belly. But after the break, the later session, we talk about tapas. I will explain a little bit about, I will tell you an anecdote about how Buddha came to sit under his tree with a big smile on his face. That was not contentment. Contentment is something that you learn in a process where you try to find your way, like the Buddha did, like all of you consciously or subconsciously also are doing in life.
That's actually not Buddha.
Say again?
That's actually not Buddha. Chinese monk.
Huh?
That figure, he's not Shakyamuni Buddha. He's a Chinese, I believe, a Chinese bodhisattva.
Okay. We will not talk about bodhisattva, we will talk about the Buddha anyway. You know what my mom also tells me sometimes, what I've had to hear growing up. My mom always say, you have it so good, don't complain. And then she adds to that, you know, when we were poor, we had nothing to eat, people were actually happier than people are now, when they have everything. That is, people in those poor circumstances, their ability to adapt. Instead of complaining, they just make do with whatever it is, with the little that they have at that moment. Even better, they were much more generous in sharing the little that they have than the people these days that have everything. They find it very difficult to part with what they have. Contentment. In the time that we live in, time of abundance, it's not easy to practice contentment. We see so much around us, so much that we don't have, but wish to get, wish to obtain. When whole society is in crisis and poor, and there is nothing to see that you'd like to obtain, you might actually think that practicing contentment is not that difficult. It's more challenging in the time that we live in now, in the time of abundance. It's very difficult. Even when you get what you want, the next thing already presents itself. Remember last week? I'm a little bit extreme sometimes. I'm starting to change that a little bit now too. When I came to Korea, I had a coat that was 97, And my next coat I got, I didn't even buy it myself. Somebody felt so pitiful about me with my coat falling apart. That one I got in 2011. After I told you that story last week, I realized that coat was not 9 years old, it was 14 years old. That coat that I got in 2011, I still have. But now I got a couple of others. Nice ones. But that's also contentment. Just make do with what you have. Even though you could buy another coat, why would you? If the other one you still have is still good. If it's still warm, if it still keeps the wind out, if it's... But with internet it becomes increasingly difficult because whatever it is that you are interested in, the algorithm bombards you with those products. And just with a few clicks you can actually just have it delivered to your front door. You don't even have to go to the department store anymore to get it. That's also a little bit tricky. First and foremost, apply contentment in your asana practice. I think that's a good start, and it will gradually integrate and expand into your daily life situations. You know, whenever I'm miserable, I worry about my future maybe. Like when I stopped teaching yoga, I had no idea. I actually honestly thought I was done. But then what? I didn't have an alternative really. I would wake up in the middle of the night with my heart pounding in my chest, with a panic attack. But then I would just ask myself, hey, but wait, there are so many people who are poor, who went to bed without a meal tonight, who don't have heating or cooling in their house. And here I am, living in an apartment with floor heating, very nice, very comfortable in the winter. Who doesn't like floor heating? When it gets too hot, I can turn on my air conditioner. I have food 3 times a day if I want to. That's contentment. The moment that you start feeling miserable, just remind yourself of you're not. There's so much. Count your blessings, to use but an expression. Count your blessings. There's something you must consciously do whenever you feel unsatisfied, or even worse, when you feel miserable. Count your blessings and let that be a foundation for your conduct. No matter how miserable you are, just perform your daily tasks. Just keep going instead of allowing yourself to drown in your misery. Everything will be all right sooner or later. It happened so many times in my life that everything did turn out all right, that I can start preaching about it. But there is also another English expression that says, God helps only those who help themselves. What does that mean? Practice contentment, keep going. Your reason to be miserable is valid. It's part of life. Sometimes we end up in a situation like that, especially as yogis, when you start following your heart more and more. But if you just give in to the misery and feel like a victim, start playing a victim role, not much is going to change about your predicament. It might even get worse. But if you keep a positive attitude and you keep going, doing your daily things, whatever it is, taking care of a family, or your job, or a study that you are engaged in, just keep going, you will see that positive attitude always leads to positive outcome. And that is, in fact, that is the real power of spirituality. We live in a time now that we talk about New Age and spirituality and what have you, we talk about it as if it were a luxury to practice yoga and to meditate and what have you. It's not. It's an essential need for mankind. The lack of the practice of contentment is the cause of all the restlessness in society, the chaos, the conflict. So it's not a luxury. In fact, if more people would engage, not necessarily yoga, but any practice that would lead to the development that yoga causes, consciousness, sensitivity, energy rising up, away from the lower chakras, there would be much less misery in the world. Ajita used to say, if only 1 in 100 people around the world would meditate, there would be no criminality anymore. There would be no violence anymore. Why? Because every 1 out of 100 going through that transformation spreads that harmony to the people who don't actively engage in the practice of yoga, meditation. Good. Let's have a short break. Thank you.